There was this abandoned building in the town where I grew up, and it was the source of many urban legends. Supposedly it used to be a hospital where a doctor went crazy after the patients died, and now they all haunted it, but I personally didn't believe it. For one thing, the building didn't look like a hospital, maybe more like a supermarket, and it also looked like it had only been abandoned for a few years. At one point, kids in my middle school started talking about breaking in, so to try to get some clout, my best friend TJ and I decided to sneak in one day. It was a cloudy Saturday when we made our move. The building sat on the outskirts of town, its cracked parking lot choked with weeds and littered with broken glass. A flimsy chain-link fence surrounded it, more of a suggestion than a barrier. From the outside, it was just a bland, rectangular structure, faded beige walls, boarded up windows, and a flat roof. Again, nothing about it really screamed haunted hospital. But as we got closer, I noticed something odd. The windows didn't line up right. It's kinda hard to describe, but some seemed too high and others too close together, like the building had been stitched together wrong, if that makes sense. "You still think this is a good idea?" TJ asked, kicking a pebble across the asphalt. "Come on, man," I said, forcing a grin. "It's just an empty shell. We'll be legends after this." We slipped through a gap in the fence and approached a side entrance, a metal door hanging off its hinges. It groaned as we pushed it open, revealing a pitch-black interior. The air inside was heavy, smelling of mildew and something faintly metallic. Our phone flashlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a vast open space that shouldn't have been there. "Whoa," TJ breathed. "This place is massive." He wasn't wrong. The building's exterior suggested a footprint of maybe 1,000 square feet, tops. But inside, the main room sprawled out endlessly, rows of rusted shelves stretching into the distance, the far wall barely visible in the dim light. Now it seemed more like a warehouse, not some old supermarket. "This can't be right," I muttered, sweeping my light around. "How is it this big?" TJ shrugged, but his eyes were wide. Maybe it's connected to something underground. We started exploring, our footsteps echoing louder than they should have. The shelves were mostly bare, but we found weird stuff scattered around. A cracked plastic tray, a pile of moldy papers, and, chillingly, an IV stand tipped over in a corner. It didn't exactly prove the hospital rumors, but it didn't disprove them either. "Let's check out the back," I said, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. We found a hallway branching off the main room, its walls lined with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, even though the power had been off for years. The hallway stretched on forever, way longer than the building's exterior could account for. We walked for what felt like minutes, but when I glanced back, the entrance was still just a few feet behind us. "TJ, this isn't normal," I said, my voice tight. "We should have hit the other side by now." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, let's turn around." But when we did, the hallway had changed. The entrance was gone, replaced by a blank wall. New doors lined the corridor, each one identical, dull gray metal with rusted handles. My heart started pounding as I grabbed the nearest one and yanked it open. It led to a staircase going down, but we were on the ground floor. There shouldn't have been a basement. Against my better judgment, I stepped onto the stairs, TJ right behind me. They descended in a tight spiral, the steps uneven and slick. After a dozen or so, we hit a landing with another door. I pushed it open, expecting a basement room. Instead, we stepped into what looked like the main room again, the same endless shelves, the same flickering lights. But the air was colder now, and the windows seemed to move when I wasn't looking. "What the hell?" TJ whispered. "We just went down." Before I could answer, a sound cut through the silence, a low, rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on metal. It was coming from deeper in the room. We froze, our flashlights trembling in our hands. "We need to get out," I said, barely above a whisper. We bolted back to the staircase door, but it wouldn't budge. The tapping grew louder, joined by a faint scraping, like nails on a chalkboard. Panic took over, and we ran blindly through the shelves, turning corners that led to more impossible spaces. Hallways bent at sharp angles, and rooms shrank as we stepped into them. Ceilings dropped lower with every breath. At one point, we stumbled into a small, tiled room that reeked of bleach. Old medical charts littered the floor, their edges curling with age. In the center sat a single chair, straps dangling from its arms. Above it, a light swung gently, though there was no breeze. "Did you hear that?" TJ hissed. I did. It was a soft, wet cough, coming from behind us. I spun around, my flashlight catching a glimpse of something pale darting out of sight. The coughing turned into a wheeze, then a voice, raspy and broken. "Stay with us." We sprinted out of the room, the building twisting around us. Hallways stretched and contracted like living things, doors appearing and vanishing. My lungs burned, but I kept running. I could hear TJ's panic breathing right beside me. The voice followed, growing louder, and then it was joined by others, whispers, moans, a chorus of misery echoing off the walls. Finally, we crashed through a door and landed in the parking lot, sprawling onto the cracked pavement. The air was warm and still, the sky a dull gray. Behind us, the building stood silently, its mundane exterior mocking what we just experienced. We didn't say a word as we stumbled home, our clothes damp with sweat and fear. And that night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my house sounded like that tapping, every shadow felt like it was watching me. The next day, I drove past the building with my dad. It looked normal, unassuming, just like always. But TJ and I know what happened in there, and sometimes, late at night, I still hear that wheeze whispering my name, begging me to come back. I was in our high school's dance squad all 4 years, and towards the end of the school year, we'd go to competitions almost every weekend. Most of the time they were held at neighboring schools, but some were on college campuses or at convention centers. I still remember one trip my junior year when we pulled up to this random sketchy building literally in the middle of nowhere. It was about an hour away, and some of us had to use the bathroom, so we made our way inside quickly. My best friend Nicole and I carried some of the bags with our pom-poms as our coach, Mrs. Paula, held the doors open for us. The moment we walked in, we were hit with this old building, slightly mildewy smell. The overhead lights were very dim, and aside from one lady sitting at a table with a clipboard, the place was deserted. All the girls started talking about how creepy this was as the person at the table checked us in and directed our coach to one of the narrow hallways at the back of this room. Apparently this place was a convention center, and each team had their own assigned room somewhere. We hadn't even seen any other teams yet, but this place was rather large, so I guess they could have already been in their rooms. Mrs. Paula thanked the woman at the table, and we started marching down the hallway. This particular hallway was long and narrow, with faded green carpet that muffled our footsteps and walls covered in chipped beige paint. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, flickering just enough to make you question if it was your imagination. Doors lined both sides, each one identical, plain wood with rusted metal handles, no signs or numbers to tell them apart. It felt like one of those endless corridors you've seen in a bad dream, but I figured it was just the nerves of the competition getting to me. Mrs. Paula led the way, her clipboard tucked under her arm, occasionally glancing back to make sure we were all keeping up. "Room 12 should be just ahead," she said, her voice sounding oddly flat in the stillness. We'd been walking for maybe a minute, but it already felt too long for a building this size. I nudged Nicole and whispered, "Does this hallway seem weird to you? Like, longer than it should be?" She frowned and adjusted the bag on her shoulder. "Yeah, a little. Maybe it's just the creepy vibe messing with us." We kept going, passing door after door, but something was off. I started counting the doors to distract myself, 5, 6, 7, but then I noticed they weren't evenly spaced anymore. Some were so close their handles almost touched, while others were separated by stretches of blank wall that seemed to stretch further with every step. My stomach twisted, but I didn't say anything. The last thing I wanted was the other girls thinking I was freaking out over nothing. Finally, Mrs. Paula stopped in front of one of the doors. "This is it, room 12, she announced, pushing it open. We shuffled inside, expecting a typical dance studio or meeting room. Instead, we stepped into a space that didn't make sense. This room was massive, way bigger than the building's exterior could possibly allow. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet above us, lined with cracked tiles, and the walls stretched out so far I couldn't see the far end through the dim light. Mirrors covered one side, reflecting the empty expanse back at us, while a single bulb dangled from a cord in the center, swaying slightly even though there was no breeze. "Whoa," Nicole muttered, setting her bag down. "This place is huge." "Too huge," I replied under my breath, scanning the room. The rest of the squad spread out, some stretching, others chattering nervously about how eerie it felt. Mrs. Paula clapped her hands. "All right, girls, let's set up and warm up. We've got 45 minutes. I tried to focus on unpacking, but my eyes kept drifting to the mirrors. Our reflections looked normal at first, me, Nicole, the other girls moving around, but then I noticed something. When I stepped to the side, my reflection didn't follow right away. It lingered for a second, like it was stuck, before snapping into place. I froze, staring at it. "Nicole," I hissed, "look at the mirrors." She glanced over and squinted. "What about them?" "Just watch." I took a slow step forward. My reflection hesitated again, then moved, but its expression didn't match mine. I was frowning and uneasy, but the girl in the mirror was smiling, a thin, tight smile that made my skin crawl. Nicole freaked out and grabbed my arm. "Okay, that's not right." Before we could say more, one of the other girls, Sarah, called out from across the room. "Hey, there's another door over here." She was standing near the far wall, pointing at a door we hadn't noticed before. It looked just like the one we'd come through, plain wood, rusted handle, but it shouldn't have been there. There's no way this building was that deep. Mrs. Paula waved her off. "Don't mess with it, Sarah. We're staying in here." But Sarah, always the curious one, smirked and said, "I'm just gonna peek." She opened the door and stepped through before anyone could stop her. A second later she screamed, a short, sharp sound that cut off abruptly. We all spun toward the door, hearts pounding. "Sarah!" Mrs. Paula shouted, rushing over. She yanked the door open, but there was no sign of her, just another hallway, narrow and dark, stretching out into the distance. "Sarah, this isn't funny. Come back this instant." Still there was no answer. The air coming from the hallway was cold, carrying a faint metallic tang. Mrs. Paula turned to us, her face pale. "Stay here, everyone. I'm going to find her." She stepped into the hallway, and we watched as her figure disappeared around a bend that shouldn't have been there. Minutes passed, 5, maybe 10, and neither of them came back. The squad started to panic, voices overlapping as girls argued about what to do. Nicole grabbed my hand. "We can't just sit here," she said. "We need to get help." I nodded, though my legs felt like jelly. "Yeah, let's go back to the front desk. That lady can call someone." We gathered a few of the braver girls, Katie and Mia, and headed for the door we'd entered through. But when we opened it, the hallway we'd walked down was gone. Instead, we were staring at a staircase going down, its steps steep and uneven, disappearing into shadows below. "This wasn't here before," Katie whispered, her voice trembling. "We don't have a choice," I said, trying to sound confident. "Come on." We started down the stairs, the air growing colder with every step. The walls were concrete now, damp and slick, and the staircase seemed to twist in on itself. After about 50 steps, way more than any building this size should have, we reached a landing with a single door. I pushed it open, expecting to see the lobby, or at least something familiar. Instead, we were back in room 12. The same massive room, the same swaying bulb, the same mirrors. Only now, the rest of the squad was gone. Our bags were still there, scattered on the floor, but the girls who'd stayed behind had vanished. "What the hell?" Mia gasped, spinning around. "How are we back here?" Of course I didn't have an answer. My eyes darted to the mirrors, and my stomach dropped. Our reflections were there, but they weren't us anymore. The figures in the glass were taller, their limbs stretched unnaturally long, their faces blurred like they'd been smeared with wet paint. They moved when we didn't, turning to face us, their heads tilting at impossible angles. "Don't look at them," Nicole said, pulling me away. "We need to keep moving." We tried the other door, the one Sarah had gone through. This time it opened to a hallway, but it was different. The walls were closer, the ceiling lower, and the lights were a sickly yellow. As we walked, the hallway seemed to breathe, the walls pulsing slightly, the floor tilting under our feet. I kept my eyes forward, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the space was shrinking, or maybe stretching, around us. Then we heard it, music. It was faint at first, like a radio playing in another room, but it grew louder as we went. A few seconds later, I recognized it was our competition music, the routine we'd been practicing for weeks, but it was somehow distorted. The tempo was dragging, and the notes were warped. "That's us," Katie said, her voice barely audible. "How was that possible?" We rounded a corner and stopped dead. Ahead was a stage, lit by a single spotlight. On it, figures were dancing, girls in our uniforms, moving in perfect sync to the warped music. But their movements were wrong, jerky and mechanical, like puppets on strings. As we watched, one turned towards us, and I saw our face, or rather, the lack of it, just a smooth, blank oval where features should have been. Mia screamed, and we bolted back the way we'd come. The hallway twisted again, the walls bending inward, the ceiling dropping until we had to crouch to keep going. My chest burned, my mind racing to make sense of it, but there was no logic here. The building was alive, its dimensions folding and unfolding like some impossible origami. We burst through another door and found ourselves outside, or so I thought. The air was still, the sky a flat gray, and the parking lot was empty. No bus, no cars, just an endless stretch of cracked asphalt. I turned back to the building, but it wasn't the convention center anymore. It was smaller, a squat, windowless box that couldn't possibly contain the sprawling nightmare we just escaped. "Where are we?" Nicole whispered. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking, "but we need to run." We took off across the lot, the ground shifting beneath us, stretching longer with every step. Behind us, I heard a low rumble, like the building was groaning. I didn't dare look back. We ran until my lungs gave out, collapsing in the dirt as the sound faded. When we finally caught our breath and looked up, we were back in the real parking lot. The bus was there, Mrs. Paula and the squad piling on, shouting for us to hurry. "Where were you?" Mrs. Paula yelled. "We've been looking everywhere." I couldn't answer. I had no idea what was going on. As we climbed onto the bus, I glanced at the building. It looked normal now, just a rundown convention center. But still, I knew what we just witnessed. Later on, Nicole and I tried to piece it together, but the details slipped away like a dream you can't hold on to. Sarah was there on the bus, claiming she'd just gotten lost in a bathroom, but she wouldn't meet our eyes. Sometimes, late at night, I hear that warped music in my head, and I wonder if that place is still out there. Are its halls still stretching and shrinking, and is it waiting for someone else to step inside? I honestly have no idea, but I don't want to find out either. One time in middle school, my best friend Jeff and I were having a sleepover at his house. His mom would usually take us somewhere fun before going back to eat dinner and play video games, and today was no exception. She took us to this museum/kids entertainment center, a place we'd been several times before, and Jeff and I had a blast. When it was dinner time, we weren't ready to leave yet, so Jeff's mom bought us something at the little cafeteria and we kept playing. Finally, it was almost like 7, which I think may have been closing time, so Jeff's mom told us we had to leave. However, just as we were about to go, Jeff and I made a shocking discovery. There was a new exhibit. I think it was about construction or something. There was a sign pointing to a narrowish hallway that led to it. The sign was bolted to the wall near the back of the main hall, a bright orange slab that read, "Construction Zone, enter at your own risk," with a cartoon hammer swinging below the text. Jeff's eyes lit up. "We've got to check this out," he said, tugging my sleeve. I hesitated. The museum was about to close and the hallway looked darker than the rest of the place, but Jeff was already begging his mom. "Please, just a quick look," he pleaded. She sighed, glancing at her phone. 5 minutes tops, then we're out of here." We grinned and dashed toward the hallway, the echo of our footsteps bouncing off the tiled floor. The corridor ended up being tighter than I'd expected, barely wide enough for us to walk side by side. Maybe it's designed just for kids to go down, I don't know. The walls were painted a dull gray, scuffed and chipped in places, and a single row of overhead lights flickered faintly, casting jittery shadows. A stale smell hung in the air, like wet concrete mixed with something sour. I figured it was just the vibe of a new exhibit still being set up, but the farther we walked, the more uneasy I felt. For one thing, the hallway seemed to stretch on too long, way longer than the museum's layout should have allowed. "Shouldn't we be there by now?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder. The entrance was still visible, a small rectangle of light, but it felt farther away than it should have been. Jeff shrugged. "It's probably just around the corner." His voice sounded off somehow, like it was coming from a few steps behind me, even though he was right next to me. I chalked it up as some weird echo and kept going. Finally, after what felt like forever, the hallway opened into the exhibit. It was a wide, cavernous room filled with construction gear, piles of bricks, stacks of lumber, and a cement mixer in the corner. Scaffolding crisscrossed the space, climbing up toward a ceiling shrouded in darkness. A few display cases lined the walls, showing off old blueprints and rusty tools, but the whole setup felt unfinished, like we'd stumbled into a work in progress. "Whoa," Jeff breathed, running toward a table covered in hard hats. "This is awesome." I forced a smile, but something was nagging at me. The room was huge, impossibly huge. For context, the museum was just a single-story building, maybe 100 feet across, but this felt like it could swallow the entire place twice over. I walked toward the far wall, counting my steps. 10, 20, 30. I stopped and looked back. Jeff was still by the table, but he seemed tiny, like he was a football field away. "Jeff, this isn't right," I called, my voice echoing oddly, like it was bouncing off invisible walls. "This room's too big." He laughed, picking up a hard hat. "What are you talking about? It's just a cool exhibit." But as he spoke, I noticed the table he was standing at. It was stretching, lengthening right before my eyes. The hard hat slid apart, the wood grain warping as the surface expanded. "Jeff, look at the table!" I shouted, my heart racing. He turned, and immediately his grin faded. "What the?" But before he could finish, the floor beneath us trembled, a low rumble that made my teeth chatter. The room started to shift. The scaffolding overhead creaked and twisted, its beams bending into unnatural angles. The walls pulsed, bulging outward 1 second, then snapping back like rubber. "We need to get out," I said, grabbing his arm. We bolted back toward the hallway, but it wasn't where we'd left it. The entrance had moved, or maybe the room had, now sitting at a weird angle across from us. We ran for it anyway, ducking under a swinging beam that hadn't been there before. Inside the hallway, things got worse. The walls were closer now, so tight we had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The lights buzzed louder, flickering in a frantic rhythm. I kept my eyes on the exit ahead, that small rectangle of light, but no matter how fast we moved, it didn't seem to get any closer. If anything, it seemed to shrink, like the hallway was stretching out in front of us. "Keep going," Jeff yelled, his voice distorted, stretching thin like a bad recording. I risked a glance back and wished I hadn't. The hallway behind us was lengthening too, the walls ripping as they extended into the distance. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, tall, jagged shapes that didn't match anything in the room. My chest burned, but I pushed forward, scraping my shoulders against the walls. Finally, we reached the exit, or what was left of it. The doorway was tiny now, barely big enough for a cat to slip through. I dropped to my knees, shoving Jeff ahead of me. "Crawl! Go!" He wriggled through, and I followed, clawing at the floor as the hallway groaned around us. The walls pressed in, brushing my back as I squeezed out the other side. We tumbled into the main hall, gasping, and scrambled to our feet. Jeff's mom was there, arms crossed. "Where have you been? I was about to call security." I opened my mouth to explain, but the words caught in my throat. Behind her, the hallway entrance was gone, just a blank stretch of wall with a faded poster about bridges. No sign, no corridor, nothing. "We got lost," Jeff mumbled, his face pale. His mom huffed. "Well, come on, place is closed." We followed her out, the normal hum of the museum feeling deafening after whatever we'd just been through. That night, back at Jeff's house, we didn't talk about it. We played this game called Tunnel B1 on his PlayStation, sitting there in silence, the glow of the TV pushing back the dark. But around midnight, I heard it, a faint tapping like nails on wood, coming from the hallway outside his room. I peeked out, and for a split second, I saw it, the hallway stretching, the far end pulling away into shadow, just like at the museum. I slammed the door shut and didn't sleep a wink. The next day, Jeff even admitted he'd heard it too. We never went back to that entertainment center, but sometimes, when I'm walking down a long hallway or passing a construction site, I feel it. I feel the space around me shifting, stretching, waiting to pull me in again.